Someone you love has been spending time with someone new. Discover who it is. My beloved child. The first sign wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no heartbreaking confession, no shocking message that appeared on a glowing phone screen. Instead, it was silence. The kind of silence that slowly settled between two people who once shared every thought, every laugh, and every ordinary moment without effort. You noticed it one quiet evening. The conversations became shorter. The replies came later. The laughter that once filled every call had been replaced by polite words that sounded carefully measured, almost rehearsed. At first, you blamed life. Everyone gets busy. Everyone has difficult days. You reminded yourself not to overthink, not to let fear create stories that didn't exist. But something deep inside refused to stay quiet. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't insecurity. It was intuition. The kind that whispers instead of screams. You remembered little details. They suddenly smiled while looking at their phone. They began disappearing for hours without explanation. Their schedule changed, yet whenever you asked about it, the answers felt strangely incomplete. Nothing seemed suspicious on its own. Together, however, the pieces formed a puzzle that your heart couldn't ignore. You tried convincing yourself that you were imagining everything. Perhaps work had become stressful. Maybe family responsibilities had increased. Maybe they simply needed space. After all, love required trust. Didn't it? Still, each passing day brought another tiny change. The morning messages became afternoon messages. The afternoon messages became evening messages. Eventually, some days passed without hearing from them at all. When they finally reached out, they apologized with tired words. I'm just exhausted. I've been busy. Everything is fine. Those words should have comforted you. Instead, they created more questions. One rainy afternoon, you found yourself staring at old photographs. There you were together, smiling without effort. There was genuine happiness in those pictures. Nothing looked forced. Nothing looked uncertain. You wondered where that version of your relationship had gone. Had it disappeared slowly? Or had you simply failed to notice? Your closest friend watched you quietly before asking a question you weren't ready to hear. Do you think someone else is in their life? The word struck harder than expected. No. You answered immediately. Too quickly. Your friend didn't argue. Instead, they simply nodded. Sometimes people don't leave all at once. Sometimes they drift. Those words stayed with you long after the conversation ended. Days later, something happened that changed everything. It was completely accidental. While scrolling through social media, you noticed a familiar location. A cafe neither of you had ever talked about. Someone had uploaded a casual group photo. Nothing unusual. Just friends enjoying coffee. But standing near the window. There they were. Smiling. Relaxed. Looking happier than they had looked with you in weeks. Standing beside someone you had never seen before. The stranger wasn't touching them. There was no obvious romance. Nothing anyone could call proof. Yet the expression on your loved one's face felt different. Natural. Comfortable. As if they had forgotten the world existed beyond that cafe. You stared at the picture longer than you should have. Who was that person? A coworker? An old friend? A cousin? Or someone entirely different? You closed the app. Then reopened it. The photograph remained. Your heartbeat grew heavier. Every possibility entered your mind. You hated yourself for wondering. You hated yourself even more for hoping there was an innocent explanation. That evening, you decided not to mention the picture. Instead, you asked a simple question. How was your day? They smiled. It was fine. Nothing more. No mention of the cafe. No mention of the people they spent time with. No mention of the stranger standing only inches away in that photograph. The silence suddenly became louder than any confession. You lay awake that night replaying every memory from the past few months. Had the distance started before you noticed? Had there been signs you ignored because love made you hopeful? Or were you creating fears from ordinary events? The hardest part wasn't knowing the truth. The hardest part was not knowing it. Questions became your constant companions. Every notification made your heart race. Every delay felt meaningful. Every explanation sounded incomplete. Yet you still loved them. And that made everything infinitely more complicated. You promised yourself one thing. You wouldn't accuse. You wouldn't assume. You would find the truth. Whatever that truth happened to be. Little did you know. The mysterious person in that photograph was hiding a secret no one expected. And when their true identity was finally revealed, it wouldn't destroy a relationship. It would change every life connected to it forever. The next morning, you woke up with one question repeating in your mind. Who was the person standing beside them in that cafe? You wanted to forget the photograph. You wanted to convince yourself that it meant nothing. But every time you closed your eyes, you saw that same smile, the one that seemed brighter than it had been in weeks. You decided not to jump to conclusions. Instead, you watched. Not in a controlling way, but carefully. You paid attention to the little things that had once seemed ordinary. Their phone was always face down now. They smiled at messages but quickly locked the screen whenever someone walked nearby. Sometimes they looked as if they wanted to tell you something, yet every conversation ended with, maybe another time. Days passed. Then another coincidence happened. You noticed they were visiting the same neighborhood more often. It wasn't close to work, and it wasn't near any family member's home. Each visit lasted about an hour. When you casually asked what brought them there, the answer came quickly. Just running errands. It sounded simple. Too simple. Something inside you whispered that the full story hadn't been told. One afternoon, you met an old mutual friend. After talking for a while, they casually mentioned your loved one's name. "Oh, I saw them recently. Your heart skipped a beat. You did? Yeah. They were with someone. I assumed you knew. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. What did they look like? The friend thought for a second. They were around the same age. Very kind. They laughed a lot together. Your stomach tightened. You forced a smile. Probably a coworker. Maybe, the friend replied. I didn't ask. The conversation moved on, but your thoughts didn't. That evening, you looked again at the cafe photograph. This time, you noticed something different. The stranger wasn't looking at the camera. Instead, they were looking at your loved one. Not with romance. Not with admiration. But with concern. Almost as if they were discussing something serious before the picture was taken. It didn't fit the story your fears had been creating. Still, questions remained. A week later, another unexpected clue appeared. Your loved one canceled dinner plans at the last minute. I'm really sorry, they texted. Something important came up. You replied kindly, wishing them well. Yet curiosity refused to disappear. Hours later, while driving home, you happened to pass the same cafe. Without thinking, you slowed down. There they were again. The same mysterious person sat across from them. Papers covered the table. Folders. A notebook. Several photographs. Whatever they were discussing didn't look like a romantic date. It looked important. Very important. Before you could see more, they both stood up. The stranger handed over a small envelope. Your loved one accepted it with trembling hands. Then something happened that completely confused you. They hugged. Not a long embrace. Not an affectionate one. It looked more like two people comforting each other after difficult news. The stranger walked away. Your loved one remained standing alone for several seconds. When they turned, you noticed something impossible to ignore. Their eyes were filled with tears. You had expected many things. Happiness. Excitement. Guilt. Instead, they looked heartbroken. Every assumption you had made suddenly felt uncertain. Who was this person? Why were they crying? What was inside the envelope? That night, your loved one finally called. Their voice sounded exhausted. I'm sorry I've been distant. You remained silent. I know things have felt different. You wanted to ask 100 questions. Instead, you simply listened. I promise I'll explain everything soon. Soon. Such a small word. Yet it carried enormous weight. Before you could respond, another call interrupted them. I have to go, they whispered. I'm sorry. The line went dead. Days continued to pass. Then one rainy afternoon, something unexpected happened. As you walked into a bookstore, someone called your name. You turned around. Standing only a few feet away was the mysterious stranger. For a second, neither of you spoke. They recognized you immediately. A mixture of surprise and nervousness crossed their face. "I've been hoping we'd meet," they said quietly. Your heartbeat echoed in your ears. "You know who I am?" They nodded. "Yes." Silence filled the space between you. Finally, they took a slow breath. "I think it's time you knew the truth." Before they could say another word, a familiar voice interrupted. "Please." You turned. Your loved one stood in the doorway, soaked from the rain. They looked at both of you with anxious eyes. "Not here." The stranger lowered their head. Your loved one stepped closer. "I never wanted you to find out like this." You searched their face for answers. The fear. The sadness. The guilt. None of it looked fake. The envelope, the tears, the secret meetings, everything suddenly felt connected. But connected to what? Your loved one finally spoke. "The person you've been worried about." They looked at the stranger before meeting your eyes. "Isn't who you think they are." The truth was only moments away. And it would change everything you believed about the past few months. The bookstore fell silent. Rain tapped steadily against the windows as you stood frozen, looking from your loved one to the mysterious stranger. Every question that had haunted you for weeks seemed ready to be answered. Your loved one took a slow breath. "I'm sorry," they said quietly. "I should have told you much sooner." The stranger nodded in agreement. "I never wanted to be the reason for misunderstandings," they added. You looked at the sealed envelope still clutched in your loved one's hand. "What is going on?" you asked. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, your loved one opened the envelope and handed you several papers. As you read the first page, confusion replaced suspicion. These weren't love letters. They weren't secret messages. They were legal documents. Mixed among them were old photographs, faded pictures taken many years ago. One photograph caught your attention immediately. Your loved one was in it as a child, standing beside an older woman you had never seen before. Another picture showed the same woman holding a baby. The stranger pointed to the image. "That woman was my mother." You looked up, puzzled. They continued softly. "And, she was also your loved one's biological aunt." Your mind struggled to process the words. "What?" Your loved one lowered their eyes. "I only found out a few months ago." Everything began to shift. The secret meetings. The documents. The emotional conversations. None of them had been about a romantic relationship. They had been about family. The stranger explained that they had spent years researching their family's history after discovering old records hidden in their late mother's belongings. Those records eventually led them to your loved one. At first, they weren't even sure the connection was real. They gathered birth certificates, adoption papers, and family records, carefully verifying every detail before reaching out. "When I contacted them," the stranger said, "I knew this news could change their life forever." Your loved one nodded. "I didn't know how to tell you." I barely understood it myself. Tears filled their eyes. I was afraid you'd think I was hiding something. You looked at them in silence. The distance. The cancelled plans. The emotional phone calls. Everything suddenly made sense. I should have trusted you, your loved one whispered. I thought I was protecting everyone until I knew the full truth. The stranger smiled gently. They never spoke badly about you. In fact, every time we met, they worried about hurting your feelings. A heavy weight lifted from your heart. The fear that had followed you for weeks slowly disappeared. But another feeling replaced it. Regret. Regret for allowing suspicion to grow instead of asking honest questions. Your loved one stepped closer. I'm sorry. You looked into their eyes. For the first time in weeks, there was no distance. No uncertainty. Only honesty. I forgive you, you said quietly. Relief spread across their face. The three of you sat together in the bookstore cafe for hours. The stranger shared old stories, faded photographs, and forgotten family history. Some memories brought laughter. Others brought tears. By the end of the evening, it no longer felt like strangers meeting. It felt like pieces of a family finding each other after years apart. As you prepared to leave, the stranger smiled. I know this started with fear, they said. But sometimes the people we think are taking someone away are actually bringing something precious back. Those words stayed with you. Outside, the rain had stopped. Clouds slowly parted, revealing the first stars of the evening. For the first time in weeks, your heart felt peaceful. But as everyone walked toward the parking lot, your loved one's phone rang. They answered. Within seconds, the color drained from their face. What? Silence. No, that can't be possible. They slowly lowered the phone. You hurried toward them. What happened? They looked at you with trembling hands. The DNA laboratory just called. You frowned. I thought everything was confirmed. Your loved one swallowed hard. So did I. They looked at the stranger, whose hopeful smile slowly disappeared. The results they sent us belonged to the wrong family. The parking lot fell silent. Everything you had just learned. Every answer. Every emotion. Might have been based on a terrible mistake. The silence in the parking lot felt endless. No one moved. No one spoke. The stranger stared at your loved one, searching their face for any sign that this was some kind of misunderstanding. There has to be a mistake, the stranger whispered. I hope so, your loved one replied, their voice shaking. The laboratory said 2 case files were accidentally switched during processing. They asked us to come in tomorrow morning. The drive home was quiet. The relief you had felt only minutes earlier had disappeared, replaced by uncertainty. Questions returned, but they were different now. Instead of wondering whether your loved one had betrayed your trust, you wondered how much pain this new mistake would cause. That night, sleep never came. Your loved one sat by the window, staring into the darkness. "I don't know what to believe anymore," they admitted. You sat beside them. "You don't have to face this alone." For the first time in weeks, they reached for your hand without hesitation. "Thank you for staying." The next morning arrived with gray skies and nervous hearts. The three of you met outside the laboratory. No one spoke as you entered the building. After several minutes, a technician invited everyone into a private office. "I'm deeply sorry," she began. "The sample mix-up was our responsibility." She placed 2 sealed envelopes on the desk. "The corrected results are here." Your loved one slowly opened the envelope. "We really are family." A wave of relief filled the room. The laboratory had made a procedural error with paperwork, but after retesting, the relationship was confirmed beyond doubt. Months of uncertainty finally came to an end. The stranger laughed through tears. "I thought I'd lost my family all over again." Your loved one embraced them tightly. "So did I." Watching them, you realized something important. Love doesn't always grow by finding someone new. Sometimes, love grows by discovering people who were always meant to be part of your life. As everyone prepared to leave, the stranger handed your loved one a small wooden box. "I wanted to wait until everything was confirmed." Inside were old letters, faded photographs, and a delicate silver pendant that had belonged to their grandmother. One letter was addressed simply, "To whoever finds our family again." Your loved one carefully unfolded the yellowed paper. The handwriting was elegant but worn with age. It spoke about hope, about forgiveness, about believing that even separated families could one day become whole again. By the time they finished reading, tears flowed freely, not from sadness, but from gratitude. Outside, the clouds had finally cleared. Sunlight broke through for the first time in days. Your loved one turned toward you. "I almost lost your trust because I was afraid to tell you the truth." You smiled softly. "And I almost lost my peace because I assumed the worst." Both of you understood the lesson. Secrets, even those meant to protect others, can create distance. Honesty, even when difficult, brings people closer. As the four of you walked toward the parking lot together, your loved one's phone vibrated once more. A message appeared on the screen. It came from an unknown number. Only one sentence appeared. "If you want to know why your family was separated all those years ago, meet me tomorrow at the old train station. Come alone." Your loved one's smile faded. The mystery wasn't over. Someone else knew the family's past. And they were finally ready to reveal the secret that had remained hidden for decades. Your loved one stared at the message in disbelief. There was no name. No phone number. Just one chilling sentence. "If you want to know why your family was separated all those years ago, meet me tomorrow at the old train station. Come alone." A cold silence settled over the room. "Who could have sent this?" you asked. They slowly shook their head. "I don't know." The stranger looked equally confused. "I've never heard anyone mention an old train station." Despite your concerns, curiosity outweighed fear. Whoever had sent the message clearly knew something about the family's past. The next morning, your loved one arrived at the abandoned train station just after sunrise. The platform was empty. Rust covered the old tracks. Broken benches stood beneath a faded station sign, and the wind carried the sound of loose metal creaking in the distance. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, footsteps echoed behind them. An elderly man emerged from the shadows, holding a worn leather satchel. "You came," he said. "I've been waiting many years for this day." "Who are you?" your loved one asked. "My name is Samuel," the man replied. "Long ago, I worked at this station. I also knew your grandparents." Your loved one's heart raced. "My grandparents?" Samuel nodded. "They were good people. But they were forced to make an impossible choice." He carefully opened the satchel and removed a bundle of old letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. "These belong to your grandmother." Your loved one accepted them with trembling hands. "She wanted you to have these someday." The first letter was dated more than 40 years earlier. It described a time of financial hardship, family disagreements, and circumstances that separated relatives who desperately wanted to stay together. There was no betrayal. No secret affair. No hidden enemy. Only difficult decisions made during painful times. As your loved one continued reading, tears filled their eyes. Their grandmother had never stopped hoping that one day the family would be reunited. Samuel spoke softly. She believed love could survive even decades of separation. Just then, another figure appeared at the station. It was you. Although the message had said to come alone, you couldn't ignore the feeling that your loved one shouldn't face the past without support. For a brief moment, they looked surprised. Then they smiled. "I'm glad you're here." Samuel smiled as well. Sometimes, the people who truly love us become part of our family's story too. He handed over one final envelope. "There is one last letter." Your loved one slowly opened it. Inside was a handwritten message. "If you are reading this, then our family has found each other again. Do not waste the years you have together. Speak honestly. Forgive quickly. Love deeply. Life is too short for silence." Neither of you spoke for several moments. The words felt as though they had crossed generations just to reach this moment. As the sun rose higher, the abandoned station no longer felt lonely. It felt like the place where a broken story had finally found its ending. Walking away hand in hand, your loved one looked at you. "I spent so much time afraid of losing the people I loved that I forgot the importance of trusting them." You squeezed their hand. "And I learned that fear can make us imagine stories that aren't true." Behind you, Samuel quietly watched the two of you leave. He smiled, then whispered to himself. They finally came home. As you reached the station entrance, your loved one's phone vibrated one final time. A notification appeared. It wasn't from an unknown number. It was from the family history website where the search had begun. "Congratulations. A newly discovered family member has accepted your connection request. Your loved one looked at the screen in amazement. The journey wasn't ending. It was only beginning. A family that had been scattered for generations was slowly finding its way back together, one connection, one conversation, and one act of forgiveness at a time. The notification remained on the screen. A newly discovered family member has accepted your connection request. No one spoke for several moments. Your loved one looked at you, then at the stranger who had unknowingly brought everyone together. "It feels unreal," they whispered. "So much has changed in such a short time." Later that evening, everyone gathered around the dining table. Old photographs, handwritten letters, and family records covered the surface. For the first time, the pieces of the family's history began to fit together. The newly discovered relative, a woman named Grace, agreed to join a video call. When her face appeared on the screen, she smiled warmly. "I've waited years to find someone from my mother's side of the family." Within minutes, stories began to flow. She shared childhood memories, treasured photographs, and tales passed down from grandparents who had never given up hope that one day the family would reunite. There were tears. There was laughter. Most of all, there was healing. As the conversation ended, Grace said something that stayed with everyone. "Families aren't only built by the years we spend together. They're also built by the decision to reconnect after years apart." The room fell quiet. Your loved one looked at you. "I almost let fear destroy the trust between us." You smiled gently. "And I almost let assumptions replace honest conversation." Both of you realized how easily misunderstandings can grow when silence takes the place of openness. Over the following weeks, life slowly returned to normal, but it wasn't the same normal. It was better. Family dinners became more frequent. Old recipes were brought back to life. Photo albums that had remained closed for decades were finally opened. Children listened with fascination as grandparents shared stories that had nearly been forgotten. The mysterious stranger who had once caused so much confusion was no longer a stranger. They had become family. One afternoon, while cleaning an old wooden chest, your loved one discovered a small notebook. Inside was a sentence written by their grandmother years earlier. "Love grows stronger when it is rooted in truth, patience, and forgiveness." Your loved one carefully closed the notebook. "I think this is the lesson she wanted all of us to learn." You nodded. Sometimes the greatest mysteries don't end with shocking betrayals. Sometimes they end with understanding. Months later, everyone gathered for the first official family reunion. People traveled from different cities. Some had never met before. Others hadn't seen each other in decades. There were hugs that lasted several minutes. There were smiles that words couldn't describe. Looking around the room, your loved one realized something extraordinary. The person they had feared was taking someone away had actually brought everyone together. What had started as suspicion had become a story of reunion. What had begun with unanswered questions had ended with hope. As the evening came to a close, your loved one stood to thank everyone. "If there's one thing this journey has taught me," they said, it's that trust is precious. When we're afraid, we should choose honest conversations instead of assumptions. And when life brings unexpected people into our path, we shouldn't always assume they're there to take something away. Sometimes they're there to give us something we've been missing all along. The room filled with applause. Outside, the stars shone brightly overhead. A gentle breeze carried the laughter of a family that had finally found one another again. And as you looked at the people gathered around you, one thought filled your heart. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about losing someone to another person. They're about discovering that love has enough room to welcome someone new into the family. Several months had passed since the family reunion. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm, but the bonds formed during that unexpected journey only grew stronger. Every Sunday, family members gathered for lunch. The old photographs that had once been scattered across boxes were carefully placed into albums. Each picture now had a story, and every story had someone eager to tell it. One afternoon, your loved one received a letter in the mail. It had no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the old train station where everything had changed. On the back, someone had written, "The greatest journeys don't end when questions are answered. They end when hearts are healed." Your loved one smiled. They knew exactly who had sent it. Samuel. When they returned to the old train station to thank him, they discovered that the small office where he had worked for years was empty. A nearby caretaker quietly explained, "Samuel moved away a few weeks ago. Before he left, he asked me to give this to anyone who came looking for him." The caretaker handed over a small wooden box. Inside was a brass pocket watch and one final handwritten note. Time has a way of separating people, but love has a way of bringing them back together. Don't waste either. Your loved one held the watch close, deeply moved. As they walked back toward the parking lot, they realized that Samuel had done more than preserve old memories, he had given an entire family a second chance. That evening, everyone gathered once again. The pocket watch was placed in the center of the table. The old letters were read aloud. Children listened with wide eyes as grandparents shared stories of courage, sacrifice, and hope. Then your loved one stood and looked around the room. "There was a time," they said, "when I believed someone new was taking away the people I loved." They smiled at the relative who had once been a complete stranger. But instead, they brought us something we didn't even know we'd lost. The room filled with warm laughter. You reached for your loved one's hand. No words were needed. Trust had replaced fear. Honesty had replaced silence. Family had replaced loneliness. As the evening came to an end, everyone stepped outside together. The sky was filled with countless stars. Your loved one looked upward and whispered, "Thank you, for bringing us back together." A gentle breeze swept through the trees, almost as if carrying that message into the night. Years later, whenever someone in the family asked how everyone had finally found one another again, the story always began with the same words. Someone you love had been spending time with someone new. Everyone would smile, knowing the ending. Because the someone new had never been a rival. They had been family all along. And that discovery became one of the greatest blessings any of them had ever received. 10 years had passed since the day everything changed. The old fears had become distant memories, replaced by a lifetime of shared celebrations, family gatherings, and new traditions. Every summer, the entire family met at the same place where the truth had first begun to unfold. The old train station. It had been restored into a small community museum, preserving the stories of families who had been reunited after years of separation. Children ran across the platform, laughing without knowing how much heartbreak had once surrounded that place. Inside the museum hung a framed copy of your grandmother's words. Speak honestly. Forgive quickly. Love deeply. Life is too short for silence. Visitors often stopped to read it. Some smiled. Some wiped away tears. Your loved one had become the keeper of the family's history, carefully preserving every photograph, every letter, and every memory so future generations would never lose their connection again. One afternoon, a young girl asked, "Is it true that everyone here almost stopped talking because of a misunderstanding?" Your loved one smiled warmly. Yes. What happened then? We chose to ask questions instead of making assumptions. The little girl thought for a moment before nodding. That sounds much better than arguing. Everyone laughed. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the family gathered for one final photograph. This time, no one was missing. The relatives who had once been strangers now stood shoulder to shoulder, smiling together. As the camera clicked, your loved one looked around and realized how close they had come to believing fear instead of truth. That single misunderstanding had almost cost them precious relationships. Instead, it became the beginning of something extraordinary. Before everyone left, the oldest member of the family raised a toast. To the people we found. To the people we never stopped loving. And to the courage to seek the truth before believing the worst. Glasses were raised. Smiles filled every face. The stars slowly appeared overhead, just as they had on the night the family first reunited. Your loved one looked at you and quietly said, "If I learned anything from this journey, it's that trust grows through honest conversations, and love becomes stronger when we choose understanding over fear." You smiled. I'd choose this family, and this journey, all over again. As everyone walked home together, laughter echoed into the night. The mystery that had begun with suspicion had ended with forgiveness, reunion, and a family stronger than ever before. The end.